On November 5, 1983, 5 men on an offshore oil rig were killed in less than the time it takes to blink. There was no fire, no collapse, no flooding, just one pressure release that turned a sealed chamber into a death sentence. What happened on the Byford Dolphin became one of the most violent accidents in commercial diving history. The rig was operating in the freezing North Sea, where saturation divers were carrying out deep underwater maintenance. Because these divers worked at extreme depths, they lived inside pressurized steel chambers connected to a diving bell. The air inside was compressed to match the pressure far below the ocean surface. After enough time, the human body adapts to that environment. But if that pressure disappears instantly, the body has no time to survive the change. That morning, the diving bell had just returned from a routine shift. 2 divers climbed from the bell into Chamber 1. 2 more were already resting in Chamber 2. Outside, 2 tenders prepared to disconnect the transfer trunk linking the bell to the chamber system. Everything looked normal. The docking was correct, the crew was calm. No one on the platform had any visible reason to think the next few seconds would become fatal. The standard procedure was simple. Seal the inner doors, depressurize the transfer trunk, then release the external clamp. But before that depressurization was complete, the clamp was opened. Inside the system, the divers were still under roughly 9 atmospheres of pressure. Outside, the rig was at 1. That difference turned the chamber into a loaded weapon. What happened next took a fraction of a second. Compressed gas detonated outward with enormous force. The diving bell tore away from the chamber. Steel parts slammed loose across the platform. One tender outside was killed almost immediately. Another was critically injured. Inside, all 4 saturation divers were hit by explosive decompression so sudden that there was no human time to react. No one could brace. No one could move. No one could survive what happened next. Crew members rushing toward the chamber found total chaos. Air was roaring through the broken system. Metal was twisted out of place. The injured tender was screaming. And inside the pressurized compartments, the 4 divers had already suffered catastrophic internal trauma. One of them had been in the act of closing the hatch when the decompression struck. The others died where they stood. Medical examinations later confirmed near-instant fatal damage consistent with an atmospheric collapse of extreme violence. What makes the Byford Dolphin disaster so disturbing is how ordinary the final moment looked before the release. There was no visible warning, no storm, no flooding, no dramatic mechanical collapse. Just experienced workers performing a familiar disconnect on a normal shift until one action happened out of sequence. Less than a second separated routine procedure from irreversible death. The investigation later concluded that this was not just a freak accident. Yes, the premature clamp release triggered the decompression, but the larger failure was that the system still allowed that release while lethal pressure remained inside. There were no effective interlocks strong enough to physically stop the disconnect. Communication between crew members was also flawed. In other words, the Byford Dolphin was a dangerous system waiting for one ordinary human lapse. The accident permanently changed commercial diving safety. Transfer systems were redesigned. Mechanical safeguards became mandatory. Pressure protocols became stricter. because the offshore industry was forced to admit something terrifying. Inside a saturation chamber, pressure is invisible. You cannot see it, you cannot hear it. And if it is released at the wrong moment, it can kill faster than the human mind can even register that anything has gone wrong. On the Byford Dolphin, 5 men learned that in less than a blink.